This video, part 1, will list all what I call Category A anime TV series that I'm aware of. I've watched all these TV shows and have written numerous reviews which I've posted on the IMDb site. In this video I'll condense this into an easy to watch format with the aim of assisting players or viewers in finding good anime to watch. Most experienced anime viewers will have almost certainly seen most of these shows, but I'm hoping there may be something in this list which may prove useful. Before I proceed with the specific anime shows, I want to provide a quick explanation of my category system. After trying a variety of numeric systems to determine how good a show is or not, in the end, it's simply too hard to compare different shows which may have been watched at different times. As a result, I asked myself two questions. Did I enjoy this the first time I watched it? And can I watch it again and still enjoy it during a subsequent watching it? If the answer is yes to both, then it's definitely Category A. Category B means I may have enjoyed the first watch of a series, but I did not enjoy any subsequent viewings. This does not mean it's bad. It could be the series' success was based on a secret which, once exposed, eliminated the pleasure of watching it. The other reason could be due to tastes changing. There is at least one anime which I worshipped when I first watched it, only to find later as it is not as enjoyable to watch. This is due to getting older, I suppose, and also expanding your understanding of the genre. A good example is old shows like Hogan's Heroes, which I greatly enjoyed back in the 1970s, but which today I cannot watch at all. In order to determine the factors which influence the classification of shows, we need to start with the core story arc. Ideally, this needs to be simple, so Gone with the Wind is basically a story about a woman who wants a man and fails to get him, and another man who wants the same woman who succeeds to get her, and then they break up and the woman realises she always wants the other man that she originally didn't think she wanted. This is a nice, simple and clear story arc. It's hard to stuff up a core story arc, but it does actually occur a lot. The main reasons for a main story arc failure is complexity and implausibility. An impossibly convoluted and complex story arc will detract from any story. So in Star Trek Picard, the story arc seems to be Picard goes on a long and convoluted and seemingly random search for some truth. He discovers a massive threat to the whole inhabited galaxy and decides to then not stop it when he has the chance of doing so, because he changed his mind and wanted to save the androids who wanted to end all organic life. Because the story arc is convoluted and confusing, we are uncertain what the point of the story is, and thus lack much interest in its progression. If a story arc is implausible, it will detract from the story. In the case of Gone with the Wind, the various love interests are all plausible. Scarlet wants Ashley because she can't have him. Rhett wants Scarlet because he sees a wild spirit in Scarlet which matches his own wild spirit. They split because Rhett thinks Scarlet still wants Ashley, while Scarlet decides she wants Rhett because Ashley was always out of reach. It's all plausible, if a little bit convoluted. In Star Trek Picard, the story arc is so implausible as to verge on the ludicrous. The purpose of a story arc is to give the audience a reason to watch the next episode. When a story arc is complex, we lose interest in it, and that reduces our interest in watching the story any further. If the story arc is implausible, the same occurs. There is one more trap. If the story arc is totally predictable, then we can also lose interest as well. Thus, we are looking for a simple and plausible story arc which has enough mystery in it to make the audience want to know how it will end. In Gone with the Wind, we want to know who ends up with whoever. I must admit, in Star Trek Picard, the story arc is not predictable, so we may wish to know what happens. However, the story arc is so confusing in plausibility, it basically makes us lose interest because we know the ending could be anything, which is exactly what occurs with Star Trek Picard. The next aspect is characters. They need to be relatable, likeable, or interesting. The simplest character is someone we can relate to. So in Overlord, Ains could be any of the audience and we can wonder what we would do in his situation. The next is likeable. So in the Saga of Tanya the Evil, Victoria is a nice and likeable character. We begin to care for her and do not wish her any harm. On the other hand, when we see sweet Victoria cut the throat of an enemy soldier, we may consider her as, possibly not not needing much worry about what's going to happen to her. But in turn, when we discover this, she becomes interesting. Finally, if we cannot relate or like it to a character, then the character must be interesting. So the character of Tanya, while not likeable or relatable, is very interesting. A super logical mind in a battle of wits against God is a character we want to know more about. So if we look at another example, Gone with the Wind, Scarlet is interesting and Rhett is definitely likeable. In Star Trek Picard, no characters are relatable as they all act in a manner which defies any form of normal logic. No long-term characters are likeable, although Elnor is the closest to a likeable character in the series. No characters are truly interesting. While all the characters seem to act illogically and in a strange manner, none of this is interesting. Instead, it's implausible and random. For example, it's impossible to consider a true psychopath as interesting, no matter how clever he or she is, because the basic motivation of such a character are unfathomable, and thus they become little more than random acts. The other factor that is required is consistency. If a character lacks this, any positivity it may gain is completely wasted. If we look at a specific character which should be positive in Star Trek Picard, which is Picard, we end up with someone who seems to lack any drive. Picard is constantly being pushed around and insulted, which has no consistency with the original TNG series. Picard, who in TNG is both interesting and likeable, if not relatable, is a totally different person to the Picard in Star Trek Picard. On the other hand, 7 of 9 has plenty of drive, but it tends to manifest itself in the form of murdering people in an almost uncontrollable manner. 7 of 9 should be an interesting character, if not likeable or relatable, but her random acts of violence and lack of consistency wastes this positive attribute. Situation is also a factor. This could be a specific mini-story arc, the story background, or interesting character interplay. In Overlord, a medium-length story arc, the interaction with the lizard people is fascinating. We discover the lizard people, their problems, how they live and how they relate with each other. Then, when they are threatened, we see how they react and how they form new relationships due to the threat. Finally, we see their great conflict and eventual loss and redemption as the servants of Nazareth. While elements of the mini-story arc supports the core plot, the way it's done is highly entertaining, even if it was a standalone series. In Star Trek Picard, most of the mini-story arcs lack much interest and seem to be more about toxic characters engaging in toxic behaviour. The search for Dr. Bruce Maddox is a good example, as not only was there no point to it, the actual locating and fate of Maddox was anything but entertaining or interesting. If I actually cared for Maddox, perhaps there would be a redeeming feature, but the series simply did not make that possible. In the Saga of Tanya the Evil, the situation of the alternate Germany in a world where World War I never occurred and instead a new World War occurs is an interesting backdrop. We see an all too familiar world which is not quite that familiar, and this alternate world holds our interest accordingly. In Star Trek Picard, the background, while very sci-fi in nature, contains nothing of any real interest. The only difference from a standard sci-fi background was the descent of the Federation into evil, or at least toxic dysfunctionality. There was almost no effort at focusing on the sci-fi nature of the background, and it was simply a typical background of deception, mistrust and irrational behaviour, which could basically occur anywhere on current Earth today. There is almost nothing there which would keep someone's attention or interest from a particular sci-fi point of view. In Overlord, when Ains, or Momon, goes on a quest with the Swords of Darkness, the character interplay is both interesting and enlightening. Watching and listening to the way this group worked and interacted with Momon, and then the way Momon reacted when he found them dead, was riveting viewing. I really wanted to know what was going to happen. How were they going to react, and what information was being disclosed? On the other hand, in Star Trek Picard, the relationship between Picard and his so-called crew was anything but interesting. It became a painful watch and detracted from the story, what story there was. I just wanted the plot to progress rather than have to endure more arguments, insults and barely controlled pointless violence. In conclusion, what we are looking for is a simple and plausible story arc which has enough mystery in it to make the audience want to know how this will end. Characters which are interesting, likeable or relatable. Interesting situations, either mini-story arcs, background situations or character interplay. The reason why these factors are critical is all of them make us want to keep on watching the series. We want to know what happens to our characters, and we want that experience to be as entertaining and riveting as possible. Serial Experiments Lain was my introduction to anime on DVD. I had previously watched some anime on TV, but this was my first purchased DVD, and it was good. This, more than anything, made me realise anime was the place to be if you wanted to experience new and innovative ideas that made you think. For a TV series to be good, it has to first have a good story arc, and Lain has that in spades. The second was the TV series has to have characters which engage you and which you either become to care for or at least want to know what was going to happen to them. Lain ticked that box big time. Finally, the story arc has to retain a consistency to keep you watching each episode, which once again Lain possessed. This is an absolute classic which everyone who's interested in anime should at least watch once. Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex was an anime I used to occasionally watch on TV without thinking too much about. As my interest in anime grew, I remembered the series and decided to purchase the DVD set and found it very good indeed. The music is excellent and the main character is brilliant. While there is an overreaching story arc, the series is also filled with entertaining standalone episodes. The quality of the episodes do vary, but there are enough good episodes to keep you watching and you quickly get drawn into the characters and their situation. The second season was also very watchable, although not as consistently good as the first season. As a result, I can easily rewatch the first season with ease, but find some of the episodes in the second season hard to get through. This is, I would also have to admit, very close to a classic, if not a classic. What originally attracted me to Ergo Proxy was its artwork, which is beautiful. The core story arc is good, although the ending is a bit open. There are a number of entertaining standalone episodes as well. In fact, I think the best episode is a standalone episode. The character of Rei Maya is excellent, and I wish they focused on her more. But the actual protagonist, Vincent Law, is good enough as well. While not possibly in the same league as Lain or even Ghost in the Shell, this is truly an excellent TV series. The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya is not an anime I would normally purchase, but after watching the movie, which I think is very good indeed, I picked up the TV series and also found it very good. This is a light-hearted story and it keeps you engaged. There is no real core story arc and instead consists of a number of loosely connected standalone episodes. The only exception is the 8 repeating episodes, which can be watched the first time but cannot be watched again as nothing really occurs in them. This is a light-hearted, happy type of story which keeps one engaged until the end, one that is well worth watching. Steins Gate is a true classic, especially the first season. The core story arc is very intricate and interesting, and the side stories are excellent as well. While being a very detailed and intricate time travel sci-fi story, the romance element is excellent as well. The second season is not as good and I would find it difficult to watch a second time, but it's certainly worth a first watch at least. This is an absolute classic which anyone that's interested in anime should at least watch once. Gate is a very enjoyable adventure anime, especially the first season. The character development is very good and there are moments when you really care for the characters. It comes a bit unstuck in the second season when the main character is building up his harem and some of the episodes aren't really that good. But it comes back together by the end and I'm really looking forward to a third season. The Devil is a Part-Timer is a surprisingly funny comedy. I normally don't consider anime to be suitable for comedy, but this really made me change my mind. There are a number of very funny moments and while basically a light-hearted series, you do care for some of the characters at moments. This is a series which I could keep on re-watching with ease. It's a real pleasure to watch this. Ungo is an unusual anime. It's like a cyberpunk and detective series, but with magic all bundled together as well. This is very entertaining, although some of the episodes are not as enjoyable in the second time around. The core story arc is reasonable, and the standalone episodes are very good as well. I absolutely love the music. Log Horizon was a surprise to me, as I found the artwork not very attractive, but the basic premise is brilliant. There is no real single core story arc. Instead, we are given a number of mission-based story arcs. The characters are engaging and the episodes a joy to watch. The second season is a bit of a letdown and very confusing due to the lack of material the anime producers had to work with, I guess. The end of the second season was poor, and I hope the third season avoids the type of mishmash. But even so, this is very watchable and certainly worth a good, every anime fan should at least watch the first season. Problem Children Are Coming From Another World, Aren't They? Is an anime I did not expect to like, but for some reason I found it very entertaining. Overpowered protagonists can be very boring, and that is the case here, but we are still presented with some lovable characters and a serious problem which actually taxes our overpowered protagonists. This is a nice, light-hearted adventure which I never expected to enjoy. It falls very much into the isekai genre. Ghost in the Shell Arise Border consists of a number of movie-length episodes, is another extremely good series. The actual story arcs are not quite that good, but the characters are excellent and engaging enough to watch to the end. I think it helped there was a small number of movie-length episodes as well. If you like Ghost in the Shell, you will love these movie-size episodes as well. No Game, No Life is also another surprise, as I did not like the artwork and thought the story premise was not really very good. But I was surprised. This is an excellent series and very entertaining. The core story arc is not its strong point. Instead, it's very much character and situation driven. This is such an enjoyable, upbeat series. I really enjoyed my third watch of it. We now move into another classic. Overlord is an absolute classic. The first episode totally draws you in, and while the story of overpowered characters can be very boring, the lack of confidence in the main protagonist removes this issue. This is a character and situation-driven series and is very enjoyable and entertaining to watch. The core story arc is very basic, but the situations make up for this lacking. By season 3, you are really confronted with the thought that you may be rooting for the bad guys, and the way this is done is absolutely brilliant. Everyone should watch this series, all 3 seasons. Many people describe this as a comedy, and while there are laughs to be had in Konosuba, I do not consider this as a pure comedy series. It's more of a mix of comedy, adventure and character interplay. This is an entertaining, enjoyable series, but is not a series I would wish to see more than a few times. Although I did find my second viewing of the first season surprisingly enjoyable, I suspect my main issue was season 2, which is a bit of a letdown. My understanding is that the movie brings you back to the same high level of quality of season 1. This is a good series to watch. Just gets into my category A classification. The Saga of Tanya the Evil is another true classic. The battle between one wronged and murdered salary worker, who becomes a little girl, and God is such a brilliant idea, it's breathtaking. This is engaging from start to end, and I'm so looking forward to watching the movie. The manga is excellent as well. I cannot recommend this enough. I particularly like the German dubbed version. It just fits the whole series really well. Great story arc, good mystery, great characters. Perhaps the characters aren't exactly likeable except for Victoria, but the characters are absolutely interesting and the philosophy is just brilliant. Comedy and anime normally don't go together very well, but Hinamatsuri is certainly an exception. You'll always find an occasional laugh in most anime, but a pure comedy anime which works is rare. This is one example and it works very well indeed. This is a great story, although there is no real conclusion, but the comedy is great, well worth a watch. Goblin Slayer is another surprise to me, as it's not a light-hearted adventure, not an isekai, and not sci-fi, and instead has a fantasy setting, which is not really my main interest, but the character and situations are so well done, this really drags you in. You really become invested in the characters, and when the Goblin Slayer is in trouble, you really fear for his safety. What is refreshing is the main character is a normal guy which went through something terrible and is now dedicated to ensure no one ever has to experience what he experienced. He is the definition of pure good, following a path which he never deviates from, and I absolutely love this series. How Not to Summon a Demon Lord is a comedy series which also has some really moving moments, filled with fan service, which I think goes a little bit too far but does not really detract from the story, so I can accept it. Is the story of a young, socially awkward boy discovering how to interact with other people. Very entertaining, and I find it an easy show to rewatch. I have to class this one as another classic, which is unusual because it's very rare for a comedy series to be a classic. But That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime is another light-hearted series with some extraordinarily good moments. Basically, the core story arc is world building, but the characters and situations are very good, and it's this that keeps you watching. I class this as a classic, and everyone who likes anime should watch this series. Ascendance of a Bookworm is another surprising gem, as the core story arc comes across as very boring, but nonetheless is captivating when you actually watch the anime. The core story arc is vague and basic, but uses a world-building premise. The characters and situations are excellent and very entertaining. You really do engage with the main characters and really want them to, you really want to know what happens to them in the future. Cautious Hero, the hero is overpowered but overly cautious, starts as a comedy but ends as an incredibly moving story. Lots of laughs and enjoyable characters and situations, but be prepared to be moved at the end. This is surprisingly good. I'd love to have a sequel, but I can't really ever see it occurring. Demon Lord Retry is another light-hearted series, but which is moving from the very beginning. This constantly pulls at the heartstring, but does move into the more traditional harem and comedy situations as well. The strength here is the characters and situation. I'm really looking forward to Season 2. This is a very enjoyable watch, and I think I've probably watched it about 4 times and enjoyed every single watch. ID Invaded is a mind twister. This is a sci-fi detective series and is excellent and surprising. Your expectations are constantly subverted and the core story is anything but basic. This will keep you captivated as well as keeping your brain running in overload as you try and work out what's happening. This, strangely enough, reminds me a bit of Steins. It is really well worth a watch. Quick note about the IMDb ratings, which I provided for each anime covered in this video. IMDb uses a simple 10-point ranking system, which is averaged out. Based on the placebo effect, or Price's Law, no matter how good something is, at least 10% of the population will dislike it. This could be as high as 20%. Based on this, a rating of 9 out of 10 represents perfection, and 8 out of 10 represents very good indeed. Most of the anime here have a rating ranging from 7 and low 9s. The problem with rating systems is you need to understand the numbers in order to make any sense of the values provided. However, even taking this into account, the ratings of all these animes I think are surprisingly low, considering how good I think they are. As a result, you always need to be careful when looking at any rating system, as it can easily lead you astray. I mean, Rotten Tomatoes' rating system is abysmal in many ways, shape and form. However, if the rating is below 5, you can be certain it's not very good, but that's about all you can really be certain of. Denken Sie daran, kämpfen Sie immer für Ihr Heimatland.